In episode 6, the story begins at Sakura's school and it's almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So, meanwhile, inside the classroom, long story short, Sakura, along with all the others, are reading a book about shepherds and what the shepherds do and etc. And I'm talking about Lee, Eli, Zachary, Chelsea, Nikki, Rita, and of course, Madison, her best friend. So anyway, Sakura tries not to fall asleep in class when Madison saw that there was something off with her. So she's asking if she's going to be all right. Don't worry about it, Sakura said. I'll be all right. So anyway, as the reading class goes on and on and on, and like I said before in the last episode, Sakura has transformed 5 star cards so far. Then she started to go into a dream sequence. So the dream sequence started with Sakura in a return outfit, and she was standing in a brick archway, and she was staring at the 3 figures that was standing right next to the cherry blossom tree. Then the sequence changed into Sakura running into the wooded area that was surrounded by falling leaves. And of course, there she saw Cloud Reed, who was also there in her dream. Now that is really weird. Then finally, Sakura runs into a house, and when she stopped to look inside of one of the open doors, she saw Cloud Reed sitting in a red chair, and in front of her were Kero and Yue. Then back to the present! In the classroom, while Sakura was falling asleep, she almost fell out of her desk, but luckily for Lee, who was sitting behind her, he caught her when he did. And it's a good thing he did. So after catching her and just in time, Lee wanted to know from Sakura, are you okay? Now the rest of the class were staring at both her and Lee. Now the teacher wanted to know if there's anything wrong with Lee and Sakura. So anyway, now that reading class is over, Sakura is joining with her best friend Madison and Lee. So Sakura told Lee and Madison that lately she's been so tired. So Madison, who agrees with Sakura, and then Lee pleaded his case to say whoever's doing it is very, very powerful. And of course, he also told Sakura that no matter what happens, that Sakura herself must be on guard. So even though Sakura agrees with Lee, then Madison tries to cheer her up the best way she knew how. She says, "Don't worry, Sakura. As soon as that all the cars are transformed, you'll have your strength back in no time." So even though Sakura had agreed with Madison and appreciated all the support that she needs, then she looks at the 5 star cards that she had transformed so far. But she was very disappointed and then she told her best friend that she still has a lot to go. Then, long story short, Eli was sitting up in a tree watching Madison, Sakura, and Lee. So while that happens, that's when Eli pleaded himself a case to say that his test has proven a lot for Sakura, and it's too much for her to handle. And then before you know it, he looks over next door at the high school where both Julian and his best friend Tori are attending at, and then he pleaded himself a case to say Julian has a harder time than Sakura did. Then meanwhile at Tori's school, and let's not forget Julian who attends there too, he was standing under the tree. He was unaware that Eli was watching him from the elementary school next door, where Sakura is attending at. So Julian, who was drifting in and out of sleep, he has no idea what's been going on with him. He pleaded himself a case to say that. Then Julian continues to plead himself a case of how he was hungry all the time and now he's been having these blackouts. He himself has found himself to be in a very serious situation. Then, just minutes later, Tori, who was his best friend and also Sakura's brother, approached Julian, who's standing under the tree, falling in and out of sleep. So Tori told his best friend Julian that soccer practice has ended already, so he needed to talk to Julian. In the meantime, while Tori's talking to Julian, the girls were playing volleyball. Then Tori went closer to Julian, who was standing under the tree, and he has this suspicious notion. So he says, I know what's going on with you lately, and I know why you've been tired. Then Tori says, I don't think you are who you think you are, he said. And then for the third time, just when he was about to let slip in front of Julian, and that's when for the third time what neither Tori nor Julian knew, that Ruby was up in a tree, and just like in the last two times, she interrupted them being Tori and Julian. So the first thing Ruby did after she got off from the tree, she claimed her case to say that she was sleeping up there. But then again, she finds the conversation between Julian and Tori very interesting in that. So then Ruby just said to Tori, oh, you know what, by the way, your coach is looking for you. He said it was urgent, Ruby said. So long story short, Tori had asked Ruby a question. Are you trying to be this annoying on purpose? What are you talking about? Ruby asked. Then Tori had a thought about Ruby's question, and then he looks at Julian, his best friend, and says, I guess we'll talk more about it later, he suggested. So after Julian agrees, that's when Tori heads off. So that leaves Ruby all by herself with Julian, just like she did before. And then she pleaded herself a case to say Tori must be catching on to her somehow. So after Ruby pleads her case to say it's too bad she can't say the same about Julian, and then she asks Julian a question. You have no idea what Tori's been telling you, do you? So then Julian's like, what? And then after Ruby had this thought, and then couldn't help but think to herself that Julian must be really confused. So she says, that makes it much easier for me. So long story short, after Ruby ran off later that night at the Avalon residence in the kitchen dining room, that's when Sakura was making veggie soup for dinner. At least that's what she told Kero. Well, Sakura not only said that she is, but she says that she'll hope to stay up long enough so she can transform all the cards. At least that's what she told Kero. Then Sakura took out the same piece of paper that she discovered in the bear's ear since the last episode. And then she told Carol, you know what I was thinking? I'm thinking that this design on this piece of paper that I found just recently might be a clue somehow, she said. And then flashback, we go back to Julian's house at the last episode. That's when Sakura had defeated the giant teddy bear that came to life for some reason. She cut off the bear's ear by using the sword, and then she uses the fly card for the wings on her back so that she can fly. And then something just fell out of the bear's ear, which is the same piece of paper with the design on it. And while looking at it, Sakura couldn't help but wonder that that's the design that the cloud cars had. So anyway, back to the present in the kitchen dining room of the Avalon residence. Kira had decided to take a look at that same piece of paper with the design that Sakura's looking at. Then Sakura had a thought and then told Kiro that maybe, in her case, that she doesn't have what it takes to transform all the cards in time. Or then again, according to what Sakura says in her case, it might be a sign or a premonition. Don't say that, Kiro says. At first, Sakura has nothing to say to him. And then he says, I mean it. All you're doing is just standing there and feeling sorry for yourself, Kiro said. Then Kiro started giving the encouragement that Sakura needs, like give it all you got, you're the chosen one, and etc. So Sakura, who agrees with Kiro and says, you're right, I can do this. And then suddenly she hears a doorbell ring. So Sakura went ahead and answered the door, and by the time that she did and opened it up, it's Julian, her brother's best friend. So the first thing Julian did was to say hello to her and if everything's okay. So Sakura says, oh, come on in. So Julian told Sakura the bad news that he won't be staying for very long. And the reason he's not is because he said that he has a book that he recently borrowed from his best friend, meaning her brother, Tori. So Julian gave Sakura the book and then asked her if she would mind giving it to her brother for him. And of course, Sakura agrees. But then suddenly, right before her eyes, Julian turns into Yue. Now Sakura's in shock, so now Yue wants to know from Sakura, would it be okay if I went in? At first, Sakura hesitated, but then she says, okay, you can come in, she said. Meanwhile, Eli was talking to Spinner, and he just pleaded his case to say Sakura had just recognized the Clarice symbol. Now, Spinner, who agrees with Eli, but then pleads his case, and of course he isn't kidding when he said that Sakura has a lot on her mind lately. Now, Eli, who agrees with Spinner, he says, well, that's true, but there's little time left, Eli said. Now, Ruby, on the other hand, who agrees with both Spinner and Eli, and that's when she pleaded herself a case. She said that Sakura has to take care of Yue all by herself, especially when it comes to that. So Eli wanted to know from Ruby by asking a question, how's her mission going along? It's going along fine, Ruby says, and even better, everything went according to plan. Now here comes a big problem because Ruby says in her case that Tori's catching on to her, which in other words, he's on to her. Now Julian, on the other hand, as Ruby says in her case, still hasn't suspected a thing, which in other words, in her case, he's still in the dark. So then it's Spinner's turn to plead his case to Ruby, to tell her, you've been very slow lately, and to coin a phrase, according to Spinner, what he says in his case, Ruby almost let the cat out of the bag. So in other words, in Spinner's case, he just told Ruby that Tori almost let slip to his best friend. So Ruby asked the question as an insult to Spinner, since you're a cat speaking of which, can't we find a bag to throw you in? So now it's Eli's turn to plead his case by saying, that's enough out of both of you. We are working together after all, he said, and of course he isn't kidding. So meanwhile, in the living room of the Avalon residence, after Kero has met up with Yue, and of course Sakura's busy washing dishes in the kitchen, that's when Yue told Kero the bad news that he's getting weaker and weaker by the minute. And here's a bigger problem because Yue just told Kero that the moonlight's power alone isn't going to be enough. So in other words, what Yue is telling Kero that he must draw from Sakura's strength in order to get himself stronger again. But then Yue had a second thought and said, on the other hand, Sakura's power is not as strong as Cloud Reed's was. So Kero, after hearing the bad news, he wanted to know from Yue, how much time does he have left? He asked him that. So Yue told Kero the worst case scenario, that it's not going to be for very long. So there's little time left, according to Yue, what he says in his case, and that's indeed a big problem. And of course, Yue also says, here comes something that's even worse. He said, if this goes on for very much longer, he says, in other words, he won't be returning to Julian. Now, Yue, who was busy looking at Sakura, who was in the kitchen, and she was unaware of this bad news. And so Yue said, there's little that Sakura can do to transform all the cards at once. And it'll utilize the cards that she has already. Of course, Yue told this to Kero. And so Kero, just like what Yue did, he transformed into his earthly form. And before you know it, within minutes later, he did just that. Now, back with Kero after he transformed to his earthly form, he told Yue that first of all, he agrees with him, and second of all, each time that Sakura transforms a card to a star card, she's getting stronger by the minute. But in the meantime, Kero said to Yue, until Sakura transforms them all, there's little power that she has, Kero said. In other words, Sakura's power itself was in fact limited. Then Kero says, "You must save your energy up until it happens and when it happens." He said that Sakura's going to need both Kero's help and Yue's at the exact same time. So even though Yue agrees with Kero that he must save up his energy till then, but then he's getting worried. He said that Sakura's powers may not be enough for him either. Well, Kero has even a bigger reason to be concerned, as well as Yue. He then said that if Yue disappears, then so will Julian. Now, Sakura, on the other hand, is still unaware of this terrible scenario. And of course, Kero had told Yue that we must not allow this to happen. Then Kero told Yue of what Sakura suspected, that she has been seeing Cloud Reed in her dreams lately. Then Kero wanted to know from Yue, I wonder, would it be possible if Cloud Reed has somehow is trying to tell Sakura something? So after Yue who thought about Kero's question, and then he says that he isn't sure of it. Then Yue had another thought and said, for some of us, death is only the beginning. So Kero not only agrees with Yue, and he too is concerned, so he made a suggestion that he and Yue must stay in their forms as much as possible. Then Kero asked Yue that since you couldn't depend on Sakura's power in any way, what else is there? Because in Kero's case, he's getting worried as well as Yue. Then Yue just told Kero, as crazy as it seems, there's another source by someone, but he has no idea who. So even though Yue has no idea, but Kero wanted to know who it was. But Yue pleaded his case to say to just trust him on this. So long story short, after Sakura came back from the kitchen with the tea set and everything else, the first thing she did was to say hello to Kero. So before Yue and Kero can answer Sakura's question if either of them can have some cookies, that's when Sakura asked the question, how many times do I have to tell you not to do that? Just let me know when you're going to transform, Sakura said. So Yue went first to transform back into Julian, who's her brother's best friend. So anyway, long story short, meanwhile at Penguin Park, that's when Lee had told Madison, who's Sakura's best friend, and Sakura, and along with Kero, to say that he had sensed something really, really weird, and he has no idea what it was. Well, luckily for Madison, she brought her video camera, so what Sakura wanted to know from Lee, if it was Clowry's magic that he's sensing. Well, according to Lee, what he says in his case, he definitely is sensing something, but he isn't sure if it was Cloud Reed's or not. But according to Lee, that could never have been possible because he says in his case that Cloud Reed's been gone for centuries. So Sakura, after thinking about what Lee said, she says, by golly, you're right. Then Lee wanted to know from Sakura, you mean you sensed it too? So Sakura nodded, and that told Lee that not only that she said that she did, but also Sakura said that it came from the Penguin Park slide. So long story short, after Lee looked over his shoulder to look at the slide that's not far away, the four of them knew that they had no time to waste. So they all ran off, all of them being Lee, Sakura, Madison, and Kero. So while running, Sakura wanted to know from Kero what was going on, even though Sakura says that she isn't sure of it, but then asked Kero, did the slide look different somehow? Well, anyway, thanks to Sakura and Kero, they were the first to arrive on the scene. But Sakura sensed that there was something wrong, and when Madison and Lee had finally arrived, Lee wanted to know from her what was going on. Now Lee could tell that there was something off with her. There's a big hole in the middle of where the slide once was. And where was the slide? Right behind the hole, of course. And they have never seen anything like it. They being Sakura, Lee, Kero, and of course Madison. And they were the first to witness it. So as Madison, Sakura, Kero, and Lee were looking at the hole very carefully, and they couldn't help but wonder where's it coming from or what was going on and etc. So Sakura stepped forward to look at the hole that she's never witnessed before up until that very minute, and then she had that suspicious thought that maybe that's where Cloudry's magic is coming from. So after Sakura had that suspicious thought, so what Kira wanted to know if Sakura wanted to go down there and to have a look for herself and to check it out. So after thinking about it, that's when Sakura told Kiro that that's what she's planning to do. So anyway, as always, Sakura uses her star key, and when she did that, she changes into her star staff. Now that's finished, the next thing that Sakura did was to use her Fly Star card, in which she did, just like in the last episode when she used it to fly herself. So now that that's done, all Sakura has to do is go down to the hold to check things out. So she wasted no time to investigate. Well, bad news for Kiro. When he attempted to go in with her, some kind of barrier has sealed over the hole. It wouldn't let him go after her. So Lee, after he found out that Kiro couldn't get in, so aha, Lee has a plan to use his power of lightning to blast his way in. So that's what he did with his sword, of course. Well, back with Kiro, he moved out of the way while Lee was using his power of lightning to blast his way in, but nothing happened. So long story short, after Lee had just told Kiro to use extreme caution, guess what Kiro did? He changes to his earthly form. And so after he did that, he told Madison and Lee, look out! So he did what any desperate person should do. Use firepower to blast his way in, just like what Lee did with lightning. But that didn't work either. So long story short, back with Sakura, who's still in a hole by the way, and she goes further and further and further until finally she reaches the bottom and she looks around in it very carefully. And she couldn't help but wonder where's that magic force coming from and what was going on here. However, Sakura was not aware that Kero wasn't with her. So now she's all by herself, and as she was looking around looking for Kero, she had no idea that Kero was still outside with Madison and Lee. And then suddenly, something came out of nowhere and bumped her on the head. And when she looked on the ground, there's a stuffed sheep. And she couldn't help but wonder, what's that doing here? So when Sakura picked up the stuffed sheep and looks at it very carefully, and she finds this really, really weird. But then, all of a sudden, Sakura realizes that that's not the only stuffed sheep that she'll find. But suddenly there was raining stuffed sheep everywhere until finally the stuffed sheep were so many of them, it went up to her neck, and she couldn't figure out what she's going to do next. So back with Lee, Madison, and Carol, who unfortunately, when they heard about what's going on with Sakura and that she's in trouble, Lee does what any desperate person would do. So when Carol was asking what was going on, that's when Lee decides to pound his way in. But no matter how much he tries, the shield just wouldn't be broken. But unfortunately, neither Madison, Lee, or Kira were aware that watching them were Ruby and Spinner. Though Ruby does have to admit it when she told Spinner this case that Lee does have some determination. He does have some guts in him, and she's not kidding. Although Spinner does agree with Ruby, but then suggests that Lee should give up. And why is that? Because Spinner says that there was no way that Lee could break through the shield like that. So even though Eli agrees with Spinner, though he also agrees with Ruby, that Lee does has more determination than it seems. So long story short, back with Sakura, things looked hopeless for her when she was surrounded by a bunch of stuffed sheep. She knows that if she doesn't do something quick, then this could mean a problem. Then she suddenly had a thought of what to do next. First of all, she thought about using the water card, which she hasn't transformed yet, but she knew if she did that, that she'll drown herself. Then she thought about the fiery star card. but knew that if she uses that she'll burn herself up. And that's indeed a big problem. But then, aha, a light bulb. Sakura has a plan. And what was that plan? By using that erase card, which she hasn't transformed yet. So guess what she did? She decides to transform the erase card, in which she did. And when it happened, the erase card's form, which is a jester in his checkered jumpsuit, and it looked great. And so, what the erase card forms did is that it erased all the stuffed sheep, one at a time, or sometimes even a few at a time. So, long story short, after Eli had pleaded his case to say how impressed he was, back with Lee, Madison, and Kero, they saw something glowing from below. And what they saw next was unbelievable. Sakura. And thanks to the fly card that she used, she flew herself out of the hole, but of course a little bit exhausted. Oh, by the way, the erased star card makes it the sixth star card on Sakura's list. Well, now that Sakura's back with Lee, Madison, and Kiro, well, good news for them. They're glad to see that she made it out all right. And what's even more better is that the shield that was there moments ago is now gone. So after long story short, Sakura had made an assurance to Lee that she'll be fine, and she's certain of it. And so Kiro wanted to know from her what happened. Well, in Sakura's case, she just told Kiro that what she saw in the hole moments ago was very weird. She saw a bunch of stuffed sheep everywhere. But that's not all. Sakura says that she felt the exact same force as she saw in her dreams. So Madison was asking, so what are we going to do about it now? We can't just leave the hole there. So there's only one thing left to do, put the slide back where it was. So that means, long story short, her best friend Madison made a suggestion to have Sakura transform another card. So she did, the power card to be exact. So that's what Sakura did. So thanks to the power star card, she lifts up the slide with the most incredible strength and puts it over the hole to the exact same spot to where it was before. Oh, by the way, that makes it 7 star cards on Sakura's list. So good news, thanks to Sakura, the penguin slide is back where it was. Now here comes the bad news. For the 4th time, after Sakura had transformed her 7th star card, she passes out. So back with Spinner and Eli that was still up in a tree, what Spinner wanted to know from Eli, did Sakura pass his test? So Eli said that she did. But unfortunately, as Eli says in his case, there are more tests for Sakura to follow. And just how many more were there? Now that she has 7 star cards so far, and there's still a lot to go. So anyway, that ends episode 6.